The real Wild West was so strange that no Hollywood screenwriter would have had the guts to make it up. These are facts that sound like some made-up bar story, but each one has a name, a date, and documents to back it up. If you're into history that feels like fiction, subscribe, because here, the truth is crazier than the movies. Number 1. In 1895, the person delivering the mail in Cascade, Montana, was a black woman nearly 60 years old, with a rifle across her lap and a cigar in her mouth. Her name was Mary Fields, but everyone called her Stagecoach Mary. She was born into slavery in Tennessee around 1832, and she only got the route because she was the fastest at hitching 6 horses to a wagon, beating every man who was competing for the job. She became the first African-American woman to carry mail in the United States and the second woman in the entire history of the U.S. Postal Service. The route was rough: mountains, waist-deep snow, wolves, and robbers. When blizzards stopped the horses, Mary put on snowshoes and made the trip on foot, carrying the mail bags on her back. She never left a delivery behind. Outside of work, she drank in Cascade saloons with special permission from the mayor, at a time when women were not even allowed inside. She died in 1914, and Cascade schools closed on the day of her funeral. Number 2. The U.S. Army once had a camel corps. Few people know this, but there was a time when camels marched across Texas under the American flag. In 1855, at the request of Jefferson Davis, who was Secretary of War at the time, Congress approved $30,000 to test the animals in the deserts of the Southwest. The following year, the first shipment arrived in Indianola, Texas, and continued on to Camp Verde. The results were impressive. The camels carried more weight than mules, could go days without drinking water, and crossed terrain that injured horses' hooves. In 1857, a caravan led by Edward Beale crossed the desert all the way to California, and the camels arrived in better shape than the mules. Even so, the project fell apart. The soldiers did not know how to handle them. Their smell scared the horses, and the Civil War put an end to the idea for good. The army sold the herd and released the rest into the desert. For decades, travelers swore they had seen wild camels in Arizona. Number 3. Bass Reeves was born into slavery in Arkansas around 1838. He escaped during the Civil War and went to live in Indian Territory, where he learned the languages and memorized every trail. In 1875, he was given a badge as a deputy U.S. Marshal. He could not read, so he memorized the warrants by what the papers looked like. Over 32 years, he brought more than 3,000 wanted men to jail. In 1902, the name on the warrant was Benny Reeves, his own son. Benny had killed his wife in Muskogee after a jealous argument and disappeared into the woods. The other deputies did not want the case. Bass went to the chief's office and demanded the warrant be handed to him. If the young man was his, then the problem was his too. He spent 2 weeks on the trail hunting down his own flesh and blood. He came back with Benny in handcuffs and turned him over to the jail without asking anyone for special treatment. His son was sentenced to life in Leavenworth and, years later, was released after being pardoned for good behavior. Bass kept wearing the badge until 1907. Number 4. The judge who fined a dead man. In the late 19th century in West Texas, the law was whatever Roy Bean said it was. He never studied law in his life, but he called himself the law west of the Pecos and banged his gavel inside his own bar, the Jersey Lily, in the tiny town of Langtry. There was no jail, deputy, or real courthouse for hundreds of miles. Bean kept a single law book on his desk and served whiskey to the jury during breaks in the proceedings. One day, a worker fell from a railroad bridge and died. Since Bean also served as coroner, he was called in to examine the body. He searched the man's pockets and found 2 things, a pistol and exactly $40. Bean looked at the body, thought for a moment, and handed down his sentence: a $40 fine for carrying a weapon illegally. He collected the money right then and there, put it in his pocket, and approved the burial. He was the only defendant in that court who paid on the spot and never filed an appeal. Number 5. Women took arsenic to look pale. Imagine taking poison on purpose every day and thinking you were taking care of yourself. In the 1800s, pale skin was not just a fashion statement, it sent a message. People with rosy skin worked outside in the sun and in the fields. People who were pale had enough money to stay indoors. That was when a product called Dr. James P. Campbell's Arsenic wafers started being sold in drugstores and through catalogs. The ads promised clear, blemish-free skin, and, believe it or not, they worked. Arsenic destroyed the red blood cells and caused anemia. Without enough blood circulating, the face turned almost transparently white. Women saw the results in the mirror and kept taking them. The price came later. Nausea, hair loss, nerve pain, and stomach and heart problems. Some were sick for years without understanding why. Others did not survive. Doctors at the time were already warning people, but the newspaper ads spoke louder than the neighborhood doctor. Number 6. The snake oil that had no snake in it. In the late 19th century, a Texan named Clark Stanley called himself the Rattlesnake King. At the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, he would step onto the stage, grab a live rattlesnake, cut it open in front of the crowd, and toss the carcass into boiling water. The fat that rose to the surface was collected right there and sold as a remedy for rheumatism, back pain, and toothaches. People bought it by the thousands. Stanley claimed he had learned the recipe from Chinese railroad workers. Those men really did use an actual oil made from a water snake rich in omega-3s. In 1917, U.S. government inspectors finally opened a bottle for testing. They found mineral oil, a little beef fat, red pepper, and turpentine. Not a trace of snake. The fine was $20, and that is how snake oil salesman became a nickname for someone who promises a cure and delivers nothing but promises. Number 7. Nobody wore 10-gallon hats. That giant hat everyone pictures on a cowboy? That is a Hollywood invention. In the real Old West, the most common hat on the streets was the bowler, that round, stiff style that today looks like something an English banker would wear. Bat Masterson wore one, so did Butch Cassidy. It was cheap, stood up to the wind, and did not blow off your head. The Stetson had been around since 1865, but the original model, the Boss of the Plains, had a short brim and a low crown. Nothing like that towering monument of felt. And there is the most famous proof, the only authenticated photo of Billy the Kid, a tintype taken around 1880. In it, he is wearing a simple wool hat, crushed and sitting crooked on his head. He looks like an ordinary guy coming home from work. The giant hat only showed up later, when Tom Mix and the stars of silent movies realized that huge brims looked better on screen. Fantasy became memory, and memory became history. Number 8. The desert's tumbleweeds are invaders from Russia. You have seen them in dozens of westerns, that dry ball rolling across the dirt street before a shootout. Well, it is not American. Its scientific name is Salsola tragus, and farmers called it Russian thistle. The plant arrived in South Dakota around 1873, hidden in sacks of flaxseed brought over by Russian-German immigrants. At first, no one noticed anything wrong. When it dries out, the plant breaks away from its own roots and turns into a cage of branches packed with seeds, up to 250,000 per plant, which the wind pushes for miles, planting them all along the way. Within 20 years, it had already reached the Pacific, choking out wheat fields. The Department of Agriculture even studied the problem in 1894. Today, it blocks roads and piles up across entire towns in Colorado and New Mexico. The greatest symbol of the Old West actually arrived by ship. Number 9. The Pony Express lasted only 18 months. On April 3, 1860, a young man got on a horse in St. Joseph, Missouri, with a mail pouch strapped to the saddle. His destination was nearly 2,000 miles away, Sacramento, California. The idea was simple and demanding. Switch horses every 15 miles, day and night, rain or shine, until the mail was delivered in 10 days. There were about 80 riders, 400 horses, and nearly 200 relay stations spread across deserts and mountains. It worked, and it went broke. At the start, each half-ounce letter cost $5, a fortune at the time, and even then the company could not make the numbers work. On October 24, 1861, the transcontinental telegraph lines met in Salt Lake City. A message that took 10 days by horse could now cross the country in seconds. 2 days later, the Pony Express announced the end of its operations, with an estimated loss of $200,000. A year and a half of service, and a century and a half of legend. Number 10. The gambling table that drove its owners to suicide. Virginia City, Nevada, in the 1870s. The town lived off the silver from the Comstock lode, and money flowed freely inside the saloons. At the Delta Saloon, there was a Pharaoh table, the most popular game in the Old West, even more popular than poker. It was an ordinary table, just like so many others, until the night its owner, a man known as Black Jake, lost $70,000 in just a few hours. Before sunrise, he took his own life. The second owner went broke at the same table and met the same fate. The third lost everything during a snowstorm, his money, the table, and part of a mine, to a customer who had only come inside to warm up. He did not make it through the night either. After that, no one wanted to go near the table. They covered the green felt and stored it in the back of the saloon, where it sat untouched for decades. Today, it is still on display in Virginia City under the nickname it was given back then, the suicide table. Number 11. Wyatt Earp died in Los Angeles, working as a movie consultant. The gunfight at the OK Corral lasted about 30 seconds in 1881 in Tombstone. Nearly 50 years later, the man who walked away alive was living in a modest house in Los Angeles, 80 years old, sick, and far from any dust. He died in January 1929 in bed, with his wife Josephine by his side, and his final years were strange. Hollywood had discovered westerns, and Earp would show up at the studios to explain how things really worked, the distance between the men, the noise, the rush, the fear. He became friends with people like Tom Mix and William S. Hart, two of the genre's biggest stars at the time. They were the two who carried his coffin. There is one detail almost no one mentions. Earp was buried in a Jewish cemetery near San Francisco in his wife's family plot. The most famous man of the Old West rests far from the desert, surrounded by names that have nothing to do with Tombstone. Number 12. The game of the West was Pharaoh, not poker. If you walked into a saloon in 1875, almost no one would be playing poker. The crowded table was the Pharaoh table, a game brought over from France that became a craze in the United States. The rules were simple. Bet on which card would come out of the dealer's box. It was fast, cheap, and easy to follow, even after a few shots of whiskey. The nickname came from the tiger printed on the saloon's signs and chips. Playing was called bucking the tiger, facing the tiger. A town full of tables became a tiger town. Now for the part almost no one talks about, an honest Pharaoh game barely made any money for the house. The advantage was tiny, and that was exactly what killed the game. To make a profit, owners started using rigged dealing boxes sold through catalogs. Doc Holliday, the dentist-turned-gunslinger, made his living at those tables. When word of the cheating spread across the country, the players disappeared, and Pharaoh went with them. Number 13. The robber who held up stagecoaches on foot and left poems behind. Imagine a man with a white beard, a bowler hat, and a calm voice stopping a Wells Fargo stagecoach without even having a horse. Charles Earl Bowles did it 28 times between 1875 and 1883 in California. He walked for miles through the mountains, waited for the stagecoach on an uphill stretch where the horses had to slow down, and pointed a shotgun that, as far as anyone knows, was never loaded. He never fired a shot. He never hurt a passenger. He only wanted the strongbox. During 2 robberies, he left notes written in verse and signed them Black Bart, the P08. The press loved it. The outlaw became a celebrity, and no one had any idea that in San Francisco he lived as a respectable gentleman named Charles Bolton. What brought Black Bart down was not a bullet or a sheriff. It was a handkerchief. During his final robbery in November 1883, he left behind a handkerchief with the laundry mark FX07. Detective Harry Morse visited nearly 90 laundries before finding the right one. Bowles got 6 years in San Quentin. Number 14. Bat Masterson died writing about boxing in New York. He survived shootouts in Dodge City, but the end came at a newsroom desk. William Barclay Masterson, known as Bat, was a buffalo hunter, Army scout, and sheriff in Kansas at a time when the law was only as strong as the man enforcing it. When the Old West came to an end, he did not become a museum piece. He took a train to New York in 1902 and signed on as a sports columnist for the New York Morning Telegraph. He spent 20 years covering boxing, arguing with promoters, and exposing fixed fights. Theodore Roosevelt even appointed him a deputy U.S. Marshal in New York, more out of respect for his name than out of necessity. On the morning of October 25, 1921, at age 67, he was finishing another column when his heart stopped. His body was found slumped over the typewriter, with the page still in the machine. The last lines he wrote were not about fighting, but about life. Everyone gets the same amount of ice. The rich get it in the summer, and the poor get it in the winter. Number 15. In 1859, a broke man delivered a letter to a San Francisco newspaper office and changed his own story. Joshua Abraham Norton had arrived in California wealthy during the gold rush and lost everything trying to control the city's rice market. He disappeared for a while. Then he came back calling himself Norton Nui, Emperor of the United States. The city played along and never stopped. Army officers gave him a blue uniform with gold epaulets. Restaurants served him meals for free and hung signs saying they served the emperor. He printed his own money in amounts ranging from 50 cents to $10, and local businesses accepted it. He published decrees in the newspapers. He dissolved Congress, ordered the army to remove the lawmakers, and commanded that a bridge be built connecting San Francisco and Oakland. Congress ignored him. Decades later, the bridge was finally built. When he dropped dead on a sidewalk on January 8, 1880, he was living in a boarding house room. Thousands attended his funeral. Number 16. The diamond scam that fooled the richest men in California. In 1872, 2 prospectors, Philip Arnold and John Slack, walked into a San Francisco bank with a bag of uncut stones. They said very little, asked for a safe deposit box, and left. That was enough. Little by little, they let the story slip about a secret field in the middle of nowhere with diamonds and rubies scattered across the ground. What no one knew was that Arnold had bought cheap gemstones in Europe and planted every one of them by hand on a piece of land in northwestern Colorado. The investors sent an expert from New York to check it out. They took him there by a winding route, with him blindfolded for much of the trip. He came back saying the place was worth millions, and the money started pouring in. The scam fell apart when geologist Clarence King went to the site and found a stone with cutting marks on it. Diamonds do not come out of the ground already cut. The company collapsed within days. Arnold and Slack had already disappeared with more than $500,000. Number 17. The girl who came back with a blue tattoo on her chin. In February 1851, the Oatman family was traveling by wagon to California when they were attacked near the Gila River in what is now Arizona. Their parents and 4 siblings were killed there. 13-year-old Olive and her sister Mary Ann were taken by a group of Yavapai and later traded to the Mojave, who lived in the Colorado River Valley. It was among the Mojave that Olive got the blue lines on her chin. According to them, the mark was meant to identify a person in the world of the dead. Mary Ann starved to death during a drought. Olive stayed. In 1856, at age 19, she was handed over at Fort Yuma in exchange for a horse and a few blankets. Her brother Lorenzo, who had been presumed dead in the attack, was alive and had been searching for her for years. From then on, Olive became a paid attraction. She went on stage from town to town and showed her marked face. Entire audiences had never seen anything like it. She almost never spoke about how she truly felt about those people. Number 18. The widow who spent nearly 40 years building a house to confuse ghosts. Sarah Winchester buried her husband in 1881 and inherited part of the Winchester rifle fortune. In 1886, she left Connecticut, bought an unfinished farmhouse in San Jose, California, and hired carpenters who were almost never let go. The story went that a medium had warned her. The people killed by her family's guns would come after her, and only endless construction would keep the spirits lost. The hammering continued until 1922, when Sarah died in her sleep at age 82. What remained was a house with no blueprint and no architect, staircases that stop at the ceiling, doors that open onto a 2-story drop, and hallways that end at a wall. Today, it has around 160 rooms. Historians say the story about the medium started in newspapers at the time. Sarah was nearly deaf, suffered from severe arthritis, and lived alone. The construction was what she did with the time she had. Number 19. The man who walked the streets of San Francisco with grizzly bears by his side. Imagine running into a man leading a grizzly bear on a leash. That was what people in San Francisco saw in the 1850s. James Cap'n Adams, known as Grizzly Adams, was a bankrupt shoemaker from Massachusetts who left everything behind and disappeared into the Sierra Nevada. There, he captured grizzly bear cubs and raised them by hand. One of them, Ben Franklin, became his hunting companion. Another, Lady Washington, carried supplies on her back like a mule. He walked around dressed in buckskin with a wolfskin cap on his head. Adams opened a museum in the city and charged admission for the public to see the animals. But the price was high. During one of the fights, a bear cracked open his skull. The wound never healed properly and started bleeding again every time he took another blow. Even so, he accepted an invitation from P.T. Barnum and paraded through New York with the bears in 1860. A few weeks later, that head injury killed him. Number 20. The mailman who crossed the Sierra Nevada on skis and was never paid by the government. He was born in Norway as John Torsteinson Rue, but in California everyone called him John Thompson. In the winter of 1856, no one could deliver mail from Placerville to Carson Valley. The snow shut everything down. Thompson made wooden skis nearly 10 feet long, grabbed a single pole, and set off. It was about 145 kilometers each way, with up to 40 kilos on his back. 3 days to cross, 2 days to return. He carried no tent or blanket. He slept beside a fire in the middle of the mountains and never got lost. He did it for 20 winters. He brought medicine to isolated people, found men frozen in the snow, and carried the ore that helped reveal the Comstock lode. Entire families in those valleys depended on him for letters, news, and money. Thompson asked Congress for $6,000 for his service. He died in 1876 at age 49 without receiving a single cent. Number 21. The house made from 50,000 bottles. In the Nevada desert, a town was born from gold in 1905 and was called Rhyolite. Wood was expensive there and took weeks to arrive, but there was one thing in abundance: empty bottles. The town had dozens of saloons and glass piled up out back. That was when Tom Kelly, a 76-year-old miner, got the idea. In 1906, he spent about 6 months collecting nearly 50,000 beer and whiskey bottles, most of them from the Adolphus Busch brand. He set them in mud and cement, laid on their sides like bricks with the bottoms facing out. He built 3 rooms. Kelly never lived there. He raffled off the house and handed the key to another family. A few years later, the gold ran out. In 1916, the power was cut off, and Rhyolite became a ghost town. The stone buildings crumbled over time. The bottle house stayed standing. In 1925, a movie studio restored it to shoot a film, and it is still there today. Number 22. The winter that ended the Old West cattle era. In the summer of 1886, drought scorched the grass across the northern plains. Even so, cattle kept coming. It was easy money, and investors wanted more. Then the cold hit. In January 1887, a blizzard buried Montana and Dakota in snow. Temperatures dropped to nearly 40 below zero. The cattle, thin and with no grass to eat, wandered around looking for shelter until they ran into barbed wire fences and died standing up, piled on top of one another. When the snow melted in the spring, the cowboys saw the full extent of the damage. Some ranchers lost more than half their herds, others lost almost everything. Theodore Roosevelt, who raised cattle in Dakota, walked away from the business. Painter Charles Russell sent his boss a drawing of a skeletal cow surrounded by wolves with a short caption, "This is all that is left." That was where the open range died. After that came fences, hay, and smaller herds, the end of the West we see in the movies. Number 23. The town that got the name Tombstone as a joke. In 1877, Ed Schieffelin left Fort Huachuca, Arizona, to search for silver in Apache territory. The soldiers warned him that the only stone he would find out there would be his own tombstone. He went anyway. He slept on the ground, carried a gun, and spent months searching the desert alone. When he finally struck a real silver vein, he remembered the joke. He registered the claim under the name Tombstone. That was his answer. Word spread. Within 2 years, the camp became a town, with banks, a theater, a newspaper, and thousands of residents. The name stuck. Tombstone, Arizona. The same place where the gunfight at the OK Corral would take place in 1881. Schieffelin became rich and died in Oregon in 1897. He asked to be buried near where it all began, wearing his prospecting clothes with his pickaxe beside him. His grave is still there today. Just a few miles from the town, the soldiers swore would become his burial place. Number 24. The ostrich farms that took over the American desert. Back in the 1880s, ostrich feathers were worth almost as much as silver by the pound. A woman's hat without feathers wouldn't leave the house. That's when an Englishman named Edwin Cawston had an idea. He bought 50 ostriches in South Africa and loaded them onto a ship bound for California. Half of them died along the way. The ones that made it became the foundation of the South Pasadena farm, and the business took off. In Arizona, the Salt River Valley filled up with alfalfa and birds nearly 10 feet tall that could run faster than a horse. Tourists took the train just to see it. Some people even rode around in carts pulled by ostriches. Then 1914 came. The open-top automobile killed the big hat, the war shut down the European market, and fashion simply turned its back on it. Feathers that had been worth a fortune dropped to scrap prices. Farmers who couldn't sell them opened the gates and let the birds loose in the desert. Number 25. The rancher who crossed a buffalo with a cow to create a new animal. In the late 1870s, the buffalo of the Great Plains were being killed by the millions. Around that time, Mary Ann Goodnight asked her husband, Charles Goodnight, owner of the J.A. Ranch in Texas, to save some orphaned calves. He brought them home and built one of the country's first privately owned buffalo herds. But Goodnight didn't stop there. He wanted an animal that could handle the harsh winters of the plains and still provide meat. So he started crossing buffalo with Angus cattle and called the result Catalo. The animal really existed. It wasn't some cowboy legend. It was heavy, shaggy, and resistant to the cold. The problem was that almost all the males were born sterile, and many cows died giving birth because the calves were too big. Goodnight spent decades trying to solve the problem and never succeeded. The buffalo herd, however, survived. 3 bulls from his herd were sent to Yellowstone in 1902 and helped establish the herd that still lives there today.